On the battlefield. No one remembers why they're fighting anymore. Explosions erase the sky. Screams are drowned out by the roar of weapons, and the war between humans and the Velgari seems endless. But then, something changes. A lone soldier, lost in the rubble of the front lines, uncovers a secret that shatters everything he thought he knew. The Velgari, the enemies he was trained to hate. They didn't come from another planet. They came from us. They are human, or rather, what's left of us. Descendants of an alternate timeline, shaped by choices we haven't made yet. This war isn't between species, it's between diverging versions of the same humanity, a broken mirror reflecting futures that refuse to coexist. Every battle is a desperate attempt to erase the past and/or prevent the future, and every death, a cruel reminder. We are fighting what we could become. Now, this soldier carries more than a weapon. He carries a question that could end the cycle, or restart it. If the enemy is yourself, are you willing to destroy who you are to win? He didn't. Remember his name. Not fully. Only the code on his uniform, K7. For weeks, or was it months, he had wandered through the ruins of what was once a front line. Now it was just ash, shattered metal, and bones stripped of meaning. The sky had forgotten what color it used to be. Gray had become the only flag above the living and the dead. K7 knew how to survive. Eat when possible, sleep with one eye open, and aim before questioning. The war had taught him that, or had programmed him that way. After all, he was a soldier of the Coalition, one of millions trained to destroy the Velgari, the other ones, the enemy. But something had shifted. He began noticing things, symbols on ruined walls that resembled Coalition marks, dead Velgari wearing human technology, fragments of a truth that didn't belong in any official briefing. And then came the moment he couldn't ignore. Inside an abandoned outpost, partially buried by plasma bombardment, he found a terminal still active, faintly illuminated, still breathing. K7 connected the neural interface. What he saw wasn't a map or a report. It was a mirror, a file, restricted, encrypted but carelessly left open, that showed human DNA sequences matching the Velgari. Shared protocols, a shared past. They're us, he whispered, his voice hoarse, barely believing. No, not the same. Twisted by time, by choices that branched off into something unrecognizable. Another humanity. One that had walked a different path. And now they were here to erase the one we chose. K7 disconnected. The terminal sparked and died. For the first time since he held a weapon, he lowered it. Not out of peace, but because he didn't know who the target was anymore. The rain returned, silent, synthetic, falling from a shattered sky that no longer obeyed any season. K7 walked beneath it without flinching. The drops slid down his armor like data streams erasing memories. He needed answers. The ruins of Sector Delta 4 were just ahead, once a Velgari command point. But now nothing more than debris and silence. As he crossed the scorched threshold, his HUD flickered, an old signal pulsing weakly from beneath the rubble. He followed it, buried under collapsed steel and forgotten time. He found a corpse. Not Velgari, not Coalition. Something in between. The body wore hybrid armor, partially human, partially alien, inscribed with symbols from both sides. But it was the face that stopped him. It was his, younger, cleaner, eyes still holding belief. K7 stepped back, his breath caught. The scanner confirmed it, 99.7% genetic match. He had been here before. No, a version of him had. In a timeline that branched, broke, and collapsed in on itself. This war wasn't just across territories, but across futures. He wasn't fighting invaders from the stars. He was caught in a loop of failed outcomes. Echoes of humanity trying over and over to correct its own path and failing. He activated the data core embedded in the corpse's armor. A message played. If you're seeing this, you've broken the cycle, or maybe you're still inside it. Either way, you need to understand. We're not enemies, not really. We're the consequences. Static swallowed the rest. K7 sat in the dust, the message echoing in his mind. How many of him had died here? How many more versions of Earth were out there, each at war with itself? For the first time, he wasn't sure if survival meant fighting harder or walking away from the battlefield entirely. The following night brought no silence. Only whispers. K7 wandered through the ruins with the sense that the world was no longer entirely physical. Echoes lingered in the air, phrases in languages he almost recognized, voices layered with fragments of himself, memories he didn't live, but felt. He wasn't alone. In the shadow of a collapsed transmission tower, he found them. Survivors. Not of the war, but of time itself. They called themselves the Rememberers. They were neither soldiers nor civilians. They had stepped outside the standard timeline cycles, fragments of humanity who retained the weight of timelines that had collapsed or been erased. To most, they were ghosts. To themselves, they were warnings. One of them, a woman with eyes clouded like the void, spoke to him without moving her lips. You've seen it now, haven't you? The war isn't against the Velgari. It never was. It's against the versions of us we never dared to become. K7 didn't answer. He couldn't. The woman stepped forward, placing a smooth black sphere into his hands. Inside, it shimmered like liquid time, showing visions of cities he never visited, battles he never fought, choices he never made. Some ended in fire, others in peace. None were real anymore, but all had once been possible. You're not here to win a war, she whispered. You're here to choose which future deserves to exist. A tremor ran through the ground, something distant, or something waking. The Rememberers began to vanish into the mist again, as if time itself was reclaiming them. But before she disappeared, the woman turned back one last time. Be careful, soldier. Not all versions of you want peace. Some only want to survive. And then he was alone again, with the weight of all his possible selves pressing down on his shoulders, like gravity that never forgave. K7 awoke in a different place. Or rather, in a different version of the same place. The ruins around him had shifted subtly, structures rearranged, shadows unfamiliar. The blood on his armor had dried, but not his own. And his weapon was gone. He wasn't alone this time. Standing. Across from him was another soldier, his face identical, movements perfectly mirrored. But his eyes were wrong. Cold, strategic, without doubt or grief. A version of himself from a timeline where hesitation had been extinguished, where mercy had been surgically removed. The alternate K7 spoke first. You linger too long in thought. That's why we lose. K7 felt the words hit deeper than any bullet. He didn't reply. There was no need. The silence between them said everything. The fractured version stepped forward, tossing a cracked helmet at his feet, his own. In my cycle, we burned the Rememberers. We ended the question before. It became dangerous. A choice then. That's what this was. This wasn't a confrontation of enemies. It was a negotiation between possibilities. A test. K7 raised his hands slowly, not in surrender, but in recognition. He was facing the part of himself that had made peace with atrocity. The version that believed survival was worth any cost. You think we win by becoming less human? K7 asked. The other version tilted his head. No. We win by letting go of what makes us weak. They stood there, two soldiers with the same scars, the same memories, but different conclusions. In that moment, K7 understood something terrifying. The enemy wasn't just future or past. It was potential, and potential is infinite. The Rememberers. That's what they were called. Those who dared to preserve timelines that never happened. Operating in silence, hidden within temporal fractures, they archived what should have been erased. Lives never lived. Victories never achieved. Futures denied by the weight of present choices. And it was to them that K7 was now being led. A cloaked figure guided him through a corridor of collapsing light, a space between moments, where time dripped like water from a cracked pipe. Each step forward felt like walking through someone else's memory. On the walls, holograms flickered, visions of Earths that had turned to ash, or never existed. A mother holding a child who was never born. A soldier refusing to fire. A peace. Treaty signed, then instantly erased. "You still think this is about war?" the cloaked figure asked without turning. "This is about memory, about what we allowed to exist." K7 remained silent, but inside him, something stirred. He wasn't sure if it was anger or recognition. They reached a chamber carved into the fabric of forgotten time. Inside, hundreds of orbs floated in the air, each one glowing with fragments of discarded timelines, echoes of other versions of humanity. The Velgari weren't created, the figure continued. They were remembered by those who refused to forget what we could become. K7 stared at the orbs. One of them pulsed brighter than the rest, almost like it recognized him. And suddenly, he saw it. A future where he never picked up a weapon. Where he taught children to plant, not kill. Where his hands were stained with soil, not blood. He turned away. The vision was beautiful and unbearable. Because now he knew. The war wasn't just about territory or species. It was about which version of humanity would be allowed to survive. The battlefield had changed. There were no more flags, no more front lines, just moments, fragmented, repeating, looping. K7 walked through a city that should not have existed. Skyscrapers half melted by time, children playing in frozen time bubbles, and soldiers firing into echoes of enemies that had already died, or hadn't yet arrived. He wasn't sure what was real anymore. Each step triggered a memory that wasn't his, visions of lives he hadn't lived but could have. In one, he held a newborn. In another, he executed a prisoner. He was a hero, a tyrant, a ghost. "This isn't a war," a voice echoed from the fog. "It's a correction." A figure emerged, a woman clad in fragmented armor, her body flickering between versions of herself. Sometimes young, sometimes old, sometimes nothing at all. "I'm you," she said, from a timeline that never surrendered. K7 raised his weapon instinctively, but her eyes, his eyes, stopped him. They weren't enemies, they were options. "What happens if I walk away?" he asked. "You become me," she replied. "The one who remembered. The one who refused to kill what we might still become." The fog thickened. Around them, time began to crack, revealing layers beneath reality. Alternate versions of Earth, endless versions of the war. Some still burning, some already lost, and in everyone, the same question echoed: if humanity cannot agree on who it is, can it ever survive what it becomes? K7 dropped his weapon, because now he understood. The enemy was not in front of him. It was the war itself. There are places that don't exist on any map. K7 found one. It was buried beneath a moon with no name, hidden under ruins twisted by time. The doors opened not with keys, but with memories. And inside was the archive, a vast, impossible structure, part machine, part organism, walls that breathed, corridors that whispered. Every surface was alive with pulses of data, flashes of alternate lives. The archive didn't store history. It stored possibility. Here. Versions of K7 walked beside him, some older, some broken, some victorious. One had a metal arm, another carried a child. One wore the uniform of the enemy. He was surrounded by echoes of who he could have been. A central core, floating, pulsing with light, began to speak. Not in words, but in pure emotion. Sorrow, rage, hope, regret. This is the cost, the archive communicated. Of every choice you never made. K7 saw it all. The times he turned away. The people he failed to save. The battles he could have stopped. Every fork in the path. Now a ghost that watched him in silence. One question burned above all others. What if the enemy only exists because we chose the wrong future? And if so, could it be undone? The archive showed him a path, not to victory but to reconciliation. Not through weapons, but through memory, understanding, acceptance. K7 stepped forward, his hand reaching into the light, and suddenly, for the first time, the war inside him paused. Not ended, not won, but paused. And that, in a universe drowning in endless conflict, was already a rebellion. He should have pulled the trigger. That was K7's instinct when he saw the Velgari commander in the ruins of Meridian Sector. His weapon was aimed, the target clear, but then the enemy hesitated and spoke. My name is Kale. I remember Earth. I remember being you. The words froze K7. The Velgari wasn't a monster. He wasn't alien. He was human. A future version, older. Altered but undeniably himself. Scarred not by age but by history, K7 hadn't yet lived. Kyle didn't attack. He offered a memory, a neural shard, encoded with his last moments as a soldier of Earth before the divergence that birthed the Velgari. A choice made out of desperation, a command followed blindly, a betrayal that rewrote an entire future. I am what you become when survival matters more than soul, Kale said, his voice heavy with something deeper than pain. Remorse. The war wasn't between two species. It was between selves who had forgotten they were one, and Kale had remembered. He had defected. He had broken ranks, not to end the war, but to warn the ones still untouched by the final choice. You can still change it, Kyle whispered. But not with weapons. With memory. K7 took the shard, and in that moment something shifted. The line between enemy and self blurred. The war map in his mind began to redraw itself, because maybe the way forward wasn't through annihilation, but through understanding. The memories from the shard didn't just play like a recording. They invaded K7's mind, raw, unfiltered. He felt Kale's fear when the first time Rift tore open over Titan. He saw the Council's desperation when the future collapsed under its own contradictions. And he lived the moment when the directive was issued. Initiate Project Severance. Split the timelines. Ensure survival at any cost. That was the true beginning of the Velgari. Not born out of evil, but out of fear. Not invaders, but orphans of a future sacrificed to save the present. And the worst part? K7 would have made the same choice, because it wasn't really a choice. It was engineered, manufactured by generations of silent wars, by algorithms deciding probability curves, by leaders too afraid to face extinction without rewriting the story. In the chaos of the battlefield, K7 stood still, not as a soldier, not as a target, as a junction, one man, at the edge of two futures, one of endless war, the other uncertain, fragile, untested. His orders were clear, but the memories whispered something else. What if the only way to save humanity is to forgive the version of ourselves we fear the most? As the Velgari approached once more, weapons lowered, K7 realized maybe history didn't need to be rewritten, just remembered differently. No shots were fired. For the first time in decades, silence reigned over the battlefield. A silence not Born of fear, but of understanding, K7 stood between the two armies, Velgari on one side, humans on the other, not as a mediator, not as a hero, as a reflection. They looked at him and saw themselves, broken, altered, scattered across time, but still human, still capable of choice. And so, the final order wasn't shouted, it was whispered, by minds long weary of repeating the same mistake. Stand down. Weapons lowered. Eyes met without hatred, and from that fragile pause, something new emerged. The council tried to cover it up. They called it a glitch in the chain of command, a tactical retreat, a classified anomaly. But those who were there knew. The war hadn't ended. It had never truly begun, because wars are fueled by lies, and all it takes to stop them is for one truth to be louder. K7 walked away from the ruins, not as a victor, but as a survivor of possibility. A living fragment of what might have been, and though the scars would remain, so tambem would the question, if we are our own enemy, what else might we become?